Iowa, September 1944. Dawn lifts in a thin band of copper over a line of apple trees beaded with cold. A 2.5-ton truck grinds to a stop beside the orchard, canvas sides flapping. The tailgate drops. 15 German prisoners, hair close-clipped, step down in denim worksuits stenciled PW, hands bare to the chill. An MP with a carbine counts quietly. A county agent checks a clipboard. The farmer nods once, says nothing, and points to the ladders. By late afternoon, the bins are full. Sap sticks to palms. Shirts darken with sweat. An army mess kettle hisses near the fence line. Coffee pours into tin cups. The county agent totals the hours against a typed rate sheet. Prevailing local wage for fruit picking, printed by the War Food Administration. He signs, the farmer signs. Payment goes to the War Department custodian, as the rules require. On a field table, the POW liaison sorts canteen coupons, the prisoners' daily pay, into envelopes marked by camp number. A few men glance up, surprised that the arithmetic is exact. The truck loads again. The MP's count matches the morning's. The farmer raises a hand in thanks that needs no translation. The day ends with ledgers, not slogans. Behind it stand law, scarcity, and a system built to keep harvests from rotting. The sight of German prisoners in an Iowa orchard did not happen by accident. It was the end of a chain that began in deserts and oceans, and in a treaty written between wars. The first large contingents of Axis prisoners reached American shores after North Africa. In the summer of 1943, ships that had carried GIs to Operation Torch and the Tunis Bizerte fighting returned loaded with men taken at Kasserine, and later in the collapse of the Axis bridgehead. Through 1944 and into 1945, more arrived from Sicily, Italy, and the Western Front. By the high water mark, the United States held over 400,000 Axis POWs in a nationwide archipelago of main camps and hundreds of branch camps. Grids on War Department maps put dots on places that had seldom seen soldiers, except in uniforms for parades: Algona, Iowa; Concordia, Kansas; Hearne, Texas; Camp Rupert, Idaho; Scottsbluff, Nebraska; dozens more from the Great Plains to the Delta, and the Pacific Northwest. The rules that governed those dots came from the 1929 Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. The language was formal and detailed. Prisoners were to receive rations equivalent in quantity and quality to those issued to the detaining power's base troops. They were to have medical care, correspondence, and religious practice. Officers could not be compelled to work. Enlisted men could, provided the labor was non-military, not dangerous, and paid. Workdays, rest periods, and holidays were spelled out. Payment was not to be handed as pocket cash in towns. Instead, it moved through camp pay ledgers and took the form of canteen credits and controlled purchases. The convention also authorized complaint channels and inspections. In peacetime, the provisions read like a gentleman's agreement. In wartime, they became a checklist that American camp commanders were expected to meet in audits and surprise visits. Why the fields needed prisoners is another map. By 1943-44, the U.S. home front ran on thin labor. The draft pulled men from farms and mills. Defense plants absorbed others with higher wages and the promise of steadier hours. Internal migration reorganized counties faster than county agents could count hands. The War Manpower Commission tried to balance scarcity with rosters and deferments. The War Food Administration became the quiet general of harvest. It mobilized civilians, the Women's Land Army, school programs, and local drives. But at the height of the sugar beet, cotton, and fruit seasons, there were still rows unpicked and storage sheds idle. Tons of perishable food stood at risk for want of bodies. PWs were the solution that fit both law and need. The War Department authorized labor detachments under guard for agricultural and timber work, canneries, and occasional municipal tasks. The agreements were precise. Farmers and processors paid the prevailing local wage, what they would have paid any civilian picker or beet thinner, to the U.S. government. The War Department, in turn, credited each prisoner a daily wage in camp currency for his labor, canteen coupons or chits redeemable for toiletries, extra food items, stationery, and small comforts. Officers could volunteer but could not be compelled. Non-commissioned officers were generally exempt from compulsory manual labor under Geneva, though many served as work leaders or interpreters on details. The administrative spine ran from corps area commanders, to post provost marshals to camp commandants who dealt daily with county, agents, and grower cooperatives. A contract meant a rate sheet posted by the county, transportation arranged by the Army, trucks or buses with tarps and benches, an MP guard ratio, lean enough to save men for the front, firm enough to keep order, and an on-site tally of hours worked. At day's end, the farmer signed the sheet. The county agent or Army procurement officer countersigned. The payment flowed through the treasury. Deductions for government-provided rations, quarters, transport, and guards were handled on the government side, not the farmers. The prisoner's pocket pay, small in U.S. terms, meaningful inside a camp economy, went into his account as coupon credit. Cash did not pass the fence. The lived geography matched the paperwork's promises. In beat country, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Idaho, prisoners hoed, thinned, and topped in rows that ran to the horizon. In Texas and the lower Mississippi Valley, they hit cotton under sun that made talk sparse. In California and Washington, they climbed ladders into citrus and apple orchards, then shouldered crates into trucks bound for packing houses. In the Pacific Northwest, they cut pulpwood and stacked billets by the cordon forest crowded with sap and sawdust. Branch camps sprouted where the jobs were. A school gymnasium converted to barracks with double bunks and a pot-bellied stove. A fairground barn with whitewashed walls. A church hall with blackout curtains and a bulletin board filled with ration menus and Geneva extracts translated into German. First days were taught. Farmers measured risk in glances. Would the guards be enough? Would the men do a day's work? Would they break tools or vanish into the corn? Prisoners measured risk differently. Would the wage be as posted or shaved by excuses? Would insults be part of the price? Would the coffee handed at noon be a lure or a test? The routine taught both sides quickly. Trucks arrived on time. Guards kept a respectful distance and watched the count. Tools were issued and returned. At quitting time, the rate sheet was pulled from a clipboard. The hours were read aloud and signatures held the arithmetic steady. Surprise on many faces came less from the guard's carbine than from the fact that the ledger matched the promise. None of this made the war less bitter. It made the harvest possible within an ethic the United States had committed to on paper and now practiced in fields. The system did not need affection to work. It needed schedules, posted rates, and a habit of obedience to a treaty that turned yesterday's enemy into legal labor today. To understand how those schedules ran, who counted hours, how the rate reached the treasury, how the camp coupons reached a man's hand, and what a day in beets or cotton looked like under guard, we step into the mechanics of the arrangement as it actually operated from dawn to dark. The arrangement lived on paper first, contracts, rate sheets, rosters, and then in habits that made the paper breathe. A county agent or grower cooperative filed a request with the Army Area Provost Marshal, crop, acreage, estimated worker days, prevailing wage per hour set by the county board. The camp procurement officer matched the request to a branch camp, a satellite of a larger post, close enough to keep transport short and guard ratios lean. The contract form listed the rate, hours, rest breaks, and the War Department's right to assign or withdraw labor based on discipline or security. Payment would go from farmer to the U.S. government, not to individuals. The prisoner would receive a fixed daily camp wage credit in coupons, per War Department tables, redeemable only inside the fence. Officers were exempt from compulsory labor under Geneva. Non-commissioned officers generally could not be compelled to manual labor either, though many served as work leaders or interpreters on details. Transport looked the same from Algona, Iowa, to Concordia, Kansas, to Hearne, Texas, to Camp Rupert, Idaho, and Scottsbluff, Nebraska. At first light, a truck or bus, canvas sides rolled, benches bolted, pulled to the branch compound gate. An MP sergeant read the detail roll. Name, POW number, status. A medical NCO scanned for illness. Helmets and carbines were visible by design. Guard ratios were spare, often a squad for 2 truckloads. Because every rifle absent from the front was an economy explained to farmers and community boards. The convoy ran the same road each day so residents learned to wave or look away without panic. At the field, the routine fixed itself quickly. Tools issued 1 for 1, ladders counted out, hooks or knives for cotton, hose for beets. Work leaders, often German NCOs serving in non-compulsory supervisory roles, translated the farmer's instructions and the county agent's safety reminders. Fingers off ladder rungs. No smoking near dry pulpwood. Keep rows straight for the lifter. An on-site tally sheet carried printed lines. Start time, stop time, crew head count, crop task, rate, signature blocks for farmer and army representative. When breaks came, the guards watched the perimeter and the canteen kettle steamed on a field table. Water was inspected, latrines sited leeward, and a trash pit marked with lime, because local health officers had signed off on the plan, and compliance meant the program stayed welcome. Pay moved along a path as regulated as a rail spur. At day's end, the county agent totaled hours against the posted rate sheet. The farmer signed. The Army representative countersigned and carried the form back to camp, where a fiscal clerk entered the amount owed the Treasury. The War Department then credited each prisoner's daily coupon pay into a ledger under his POW number. Inside the compound, a camp canteen, stocked through quartermaster channels, sold toiletries, stationery, tobacco, fruit, and occasional extras. Coupons kept temptation and black market risk low. Cash did not leave the fence. Complaints about missing credits traveled a formal route. Work leader to German man of confidence, the elected prisoner representative under Geneva, to the camp commandant, and then to the judge advocate if needed. Inspections, notices from the protecting power or the International Committee of the Red Cross when routes allowed, checked that wages, hours, and work types matched convention language. The geography of labor followed harvest maps. In beet country, the year's biggest need arrived twice, thinning in spring, topping in fall. Prisoners marched in rows, hoe blades flashing, a county agent pointing out weeds and spacing with the patient authority of someone who had convinced schoolchildren and church groups before the POWs arrived. In cotton, the rhythm was slower and the sun harder, filled sacks dumped to a scale, and the weights tallied on the same sheet that recorded hours. In orchards, the day smelled of bruised fruit. Ladders creaked, crates slid, canneries and packing sheds added night shifts, POWs behind a line, cans moving fast, supervisors with clipboards timing breaks and reminding the line that a machine ran better with a steady feed than a sprint install. In pulpwood, axes traded places with saws. Billets were stacked to a cord and pencils wrote 8-foot 12-inch with a forester's insistence on accuracy. Sundays were quiet by design. Geneva required rest days and holidays. Camp bulletins listed religious services, canteen hours, and the week's detail rosters. The man of confidence posted translations of the camp order that covered work rules. No leaving lines without permission. No contact with civilians beyond structured instructions. Report injuries at once. Infractions brought camp discipline, loss of privileges, confinement, transfer back to a main post. Not summary justice in a field. That distinction mattered to sheriffs and pastors who had sat in on the first town meetings and had promised voters that the program would be orderly, food politics sometimes louder than wage, politics and followed rations cards in the convention. Prisoners received base troop equivalents. Work details brought supplemental calories appropriate to task. County boards and the War Food Administration reinforced the point publicly. The program existed to save crops, not to improve a prisoner's diet at a civilian's expense. In harvest crunches, school releases, and Women's Land Army detachments still came. Bracero contracts filled gaps in the Southwest. The point was not that POW labor replaced them, but that it joined a stacked roster under one timetable. First encounters did carry a charge. Some prisoners arrived angry or wary, primed by propaganda to expect starvation or abuse. Some farmers held their own reserves, especially those with sons overseas or names on Gold Star banners. The rate sheet and the tally softened the edge. When hours matched envelopes at week's end, and when a canteen coupon bought a bar of soap or a letter pad without trouble, surprise edged into acceptance. Observers wrote the same line, whether in Algona newsletters or Concordia town minutes. Work was steady, pay was as posted. The phrase captured the essential credibility that kept the trucks rolling. Security incidents existed but did not define the program. There were escapes, most brief. Men caught within days, hungry, cold, returned through county jails that had kept the coffee on. There were arguments over piecework versus hourly tallies. Judge-advocate memos settled disputes by quoting the contract and Geneva in measured paragraphs. There were church picnics and Christmas concerts staged by POW choirs under guard on courthouse lawns. None of those were required by treaty. All of them were possible because the core transaction, labor at the prevailing wage, paid through the government, credited to the prisoner, ran predictably. By the harvests of 1944 and 1945, the system had become a clock. The hands were farmers, agents, guards, and prisoners. The pendulum was the rate sheet. The tick was the truck gate opening at dawn. Under that cadence, fair pay ceased to be an argument and became procedure, which is the only way a wartime program with enemies on both sides of the fence could last. With the ground rules clear, the film can now widen and then tighten again, into the human reactions, the logistics that made dawn to dark possible, the legal spine behind the signatures, and the moral weight of paying an enemy exactly what the board posted. A harvest day is made of ordinary gestures. Glove tug, ladder lift, a nod that says this tree next. The German prisoners learned the cadence fast, partly from work leaders who had thinned beets in Bavaria or cut timber in the Harz, partly from American farmers whose speech ran short and exact. The MP presence set a quiet border. Carbine slung, count kept, little else. What surprised many POWs was not the guard. It was the predictability. The rate sheet pinned to a clipboard matched the number read aloud at dusk. The county agent's pencil did not slide. At noon, a kettle hissed. Coffee for civilians. Water for all. Rations taken from army tins that tasted the same inside and outside the fence. A farmer might offer a tin dipper of well water across a gap the rule book did not require anyone to bridge. Grace before eating came in 2 languages some days and none on others. Women from the church brought pies to the field edge on Sundays after service, and left them on a table a pastor had insisted was common ground under God, under guard. No rulebook asked for that either, but it happened because the program's center, work done, wages fair, had lowered the temperature of the day. For the prisoners, canteen coupons became miniature freedoms, soap that smelled like a memory, paper for a letter to Westphalia that censors would read and family would keep, tobacco shared in the yard after lights out. The shock many recorded later was this: the wage was as posted. Not generous, not mean, simply the same line any local would have earned. It replaced a picture painted by propaganda with a ledger line, which for men accustomed to orders felt like a different kind of honesty. The system worked because it moved like a convoy. 0600 roll call at the branch camp gate. An MP sergeant checks names against the detail roster. A medic notes coughs and blisters. Trucks pull onto the road, canvas rattling, benches full, tool racks clanging in rhythm. The route is fixed. Sheriffs know the time. School buses pass on the other side with drivers who have stopped staring. 0700 arrival. Perimeter set. Tools issued 1 for 1. Hose, sack hooks, ladders marked with stenciled numbers. 7:05 work begins. A county agent explains the task. Row spacing for beets, sack weights for cotton, 2-hand safety on the ladder. Every hour has its mark. 10-minute pauses timed by the agent's pocket watch. Water points inspected, latrine pits limed, refuse buried. Ticks of compliance that keep health officers and camp commanders content. 1200 break. Rations opened. Tallies updated in pencil columns. Head count present, hours to the half. Tasks noted for piece rate adjustments when contracts require it. 1600, 1700. Tools counted back. Broken handles logged without drama. The army replaces, the farmer signs, the prisoner is not charged. Dusk. The agent reads the posted wage aloud. Farmer signs. Army countersigns. The sheet travels back to camp with a guard who has learned to keep paper dry in a light rain. In the compound, the fiscal clerk enters the day's total against the farm's account. The coupon ledger credits each POW the fixed daily amount. A man of confidence, the elected prisoner representative, checks the numbers, fields gripes, and carries formal complaints to the commandant if a tally seems light. Fridays the canteen window is busier. Saturdays the chapel posts service times. Sundays no transport unless a crisis says otherwise. Nothing about this is accidental. The program's politics, skeptical voters, cautious farm boards, cautious army lawyers, depend on the schedule being the story. The moral center of the harvest was a contract backed by treaty. The 1929 Geneva Convention set the frame: humane treatment, officers exempt from compulsory labor, enlisted men subject to non-military, non-dangerous paid work, working hours comparable to civilians, rest days, Complaint channels through the man of confidence. Inspections by a protecting power or the ICRC. The War Department translated that into circulars and judge advocate opinions that camp commandants kept in ring binders. And county agents learned to, quote, pay language mattered most. Farmers paid the prevailing local wage into a U.S. Treasury account, not to individuals. The Army credited each POW a fixed daily camp wage, scaled by grade, issued in coupon currency spendable only at the canteen. Deductions for rations, quarters, transport, and guards were not taken from the POW's coupon credit. They were part of the government side of the contract. Officers could volunteer for non-hazardous work but could not be compelled. NCOs were typically exempt from compulsory manual labor, but often served as work leaders, translators, or clerks, paid accordingly within camp rules. Disputes had a path. If a rate sheet failed to match what the farmer offered, the county board corrected it or the judge advocate did, usually by pointing to the posted bulletin and the signed contract. If a prisoner claimed his coupon credit was short, the man of confidence carried the claim to the commandant, who checked the ledger and the tally sheet from the field. Recurring errors triggered audits. Inspections, when transportation allowed, walked the rows, checked hours, asked about rest days and holidays, and looked at canteen books. On paper it could look fussy. In the field it kept the trucks rolling. The rule sat between suspicion and trust and gave both sides something firmer than memory to lean on. Hands finding rhythm, trucks running to the minute, and contracts speaking with the force of law. Together they built a platform sturdy enough to carry a wartime harvest. The remaining angles widened the lens. Money and output, perception on both sides of the fence, and the moral weather of small towns learning to work with captured men under guard. In 1944, the farm problem was not seed or weather alone. It was hands. The draft had thinned crews. High-wage war plants pulled drivers from tractors. Rail and truck bottlenecks punished delay. The arithmetic of perishables is cruel. Beets topped late lose sugar. Cotton left to weather sheds lint and value. Fruit past peak becomes fodder for vinegar, not tables. POW labor didn't replace civilians. It stacked with school releases, Women's Land Army crews, and bracero contracts to thicken the line when the window narrowed. County boards set prevailing wage sheets crop by crop, updated as seasons turned. Farmers paid those rates to the Treasury. The Treasury's line moved through War Department ledgers. The prisoner's camp coupon credit arrived predictably. The difference showed up in tonnage saved and shifts run. Canneries posted second shifts because branch camps could supply a night crew under guard. Beat cooperatives booked extra rail cars because fields finished on time. A county agent's notebook from the plains or the Snake River Plain tells the story in pencil. POW detachment, 60 men, beets topped in 3 days, contract complete. Rains followed. On a balance sheet, POW labor stabilized price and supply in regions where a missed harvest would have meant ration adjustments later. The program also returned money. Farmer payments flowed to the Treasury, offsetting the costs of housing, rations, and guards. It wasn't profit, but it wasn't charity either. Critics asked whether prisoners undercut local wages. The answer by design was no. The posted civilian rate was the rate. Complaints about piecework versus hourly tallies surfaced and were settled by judge-advocate citation of contracts. The economic engine functioned because rules kept labor not cheaper but reliable, and reliability in a harvest is the most valuable commodity. Many Germans arrived with hard pictures in their heads, stories of cruelty and starvation, of vindictive farmers and guards waiting for a pretext. The first week's routine often punched holes in the image. Trucks came and left on schedule. Guards watched but didn't bait. The rate sheet on the clipboard matched the figure read at dusk. Camp coupons bought a pencil, a soap bar, a packet of tobacco. The man of confidence filed grievances through a channel that answered, eventually, in writing. Letters home passed through censors and reached Westphalia or Württemberg with careful phrases like, Arbeit ist geordnet, the work is orderly. Not every face across the fence was friendly. Some farmers measured their patience against casualty telegrams and found it thin. Some prisoners carried political loyalties that made them scornful or sullen. But contact under predictable terms has its own weather. A farmer who said good work because the bins were full did not have to like the men who filled them. A prisoner who received the day's credit did not have to admire the system that issued it. The surprise lay in the absence of petty theft from the wage. No shaving for tools or transport beyond what the government side already charged itself in its books. The effect rippled forward. By late 1944 and into 1945, surrender narratives from some units acknowledged a grudging trust in American treatment. The POW grapevine talked fastest of food and pay. Word that harvest details meant steady work, fair rates, coupons honored did not end the war. It did sand down a corner of fear. Perception shifted from enemy that hates to system that keeps its own rules. In wartime, that is not sentiment. It is a fact pattern strong enough to carry through repatriation and memory. The moral weather over a program like this is local. It lives in town halls and church basements, at school boards and in sheriff offices where the map of guard routes hangs beside a photo of boys overseas. Communities signed on because harvests mattered, and because Geneva gave them language to defend the choice. Prisoners were legal labor, paid at local rates, under Army control. Within that frame, a culture grew. Pastors organized Sunday vespers near camp fences. Civic clubs dropped magazines at the gate. Librarians collected German titles for camp shelves. At Christmas, choirs from branch camps sang carols on courthouse lawns. Stille Nacht floating over a square where MPs stood easy and people kept their hands out of pockets. None of that erased the uniforms. It acknowledged a complicated fact. The town was paying former enemies fairly because a treaty said so, and because food on tables said so. There were frictions. A scuffle in a beat row when a prisoner mouthed off about a son at Anzio. A window smashed on a night when telegrams came in bunches. A county meeting where a woman asked why prisoners had soap in the canteen when her ration book said N for none today. The answer held because the structure held. Base rations for the prisoner equivalent to base troops, supplemental calories for hard work, no cash beyond the fence, complaints in writing, inspections when roads allowed. The fairness of pay was not a gesture. It was a policy that constrained tempers, proved itself in ink, and made possible the occasional courtesy, a pie left on a table, a thank you said under guard, that people remembered when the uniforms were gone. The community's labor was to keep the lines clear. Work here, worship here, visit there, no crossing without leave. Within those lines, something like respect took root, trimmed by rules and watered by routine. That moral steadiness would be tested when rain threatened sugar content, when cotton was late, when trains were short, but a test is what the next season delivered. The angles fold into the campaign of the fields, a 1944 harvest crunch when days mattered, and the policy, prevailing wages paid, coupons credited, schedules kept, proved whether a treaty could save what weather and war endangered. The crisis arrived with the weather report and a calendar that refused to blink. October 1944. Upper Midwest and Great Plains. A cold front leaned down from Canada. Forecasters spoke in tones county agents understood too well. Hard frost in 2 nights, maybe 3. Sugar beets were at sugar peak. If topped late, the percentage would drop. If left in the ground after a hard freeze, the beets would rot or split. The War Food Administration telephoned through state boards. Notes went to camp commandants and branch camp sergeants. Trucks were requisitioned. Rate sheets were reposted to avoid argument in the field. The order was simple: finish the rows. At Algona, Iowa, the roll call ran long before dawn. An MP sergeant read names over the chuff of idling trucks while a medic checked hands for blisters that could split in cold. 2 squads guarded 3 truckloads. Lean ratios explained to town councils months earlier. At the Scottsbluff Beet Factory in Nebraska, the night shift watched the yard fill with wagons. They could not run the slicers without beets. They could not wait on nature's patience. On the Snake River Plain near Rupert, Idaho, company men chalked bin numbers and sent runners to the branch camp to ask if the detail could stay an extra hour past dusk. The answer returned from the commandant with a stamp, approved, and a caution on rest rules. Extra hour today, later start tomorrow. The Geneva pages on rest days were not suggestions. They were program armor. In the fields, the cadence changed. Thinning had been steady. Topping under a frost warning became a drill. Work leaders, German NCOs exempt from compulsory manual labor but serving by choice as non-compulsory leaders, walked the rows and repeated the farmer's instructions in crisp German. Knife angle low, crown clean, toss forward to the wagon. County agents stood at interval points, pocket watches in hand. They were not foremen. But in a crunch they wore the urgency of one. The posted prevailing wage, hourly in some counties, peace adjustments where contracts allowed, had been agreed weeks earlier. Now its clarity mattered more than its number. No haggling. No shaving. Pay to the treasury, coupons to the men. At noon a front edge of sleet stung faces. A kettle hissed on a field table. Guards kept the perimeter. Farmers brought a second kettle because hot water is faster than speeches. The man of confidence, the prisoner's elected representative under Geneva, walked the line with the county agent and raised one request. Extend the break 5 minutes for hands that had gone numb. The agent nodded and wrote it on the tally sheet. The MP sergeant glanced at his watch and agreed with a shrug. The system bent without breaking. By late afternoon, wagons rocked toward weighbridges. Scale beams snapped down. Weights were chalked on boards. Numbers traveled to the factory and to the county agent's ledger. The posted rate sat at the top of the page like a promise. Farmers signed. The Army procurement officer countersigned. Payment moved toward the treasury. In camp that night, the fiscal clerk credited each POW's coupon pay and the canteen window stayed open an extra 15 minutes. A commandant's concession that bought goodwill at very low cost. South and east, the same urgency ran through Cotton. In Texas counties, late bowls under a gray sky threatened to soak and stain. A branch camp at Hearn sent out crews balanced between MP coverage and the scale of fields that could be saved. Piece rate contracts, common in Cotton, had fueled earlier arguments in other seasons. Now the judge advocate's memos, already circulated, settled the method. Piece pay allowed only where it matched county standards and the posted rate. A farmer tried to round down on a sack weight. The county agent put a finger on the rate sheet and cleared his throat. As posted, he said. The correction held. The story would travel farther than the bull wagon. On the West Coast, citrus and late apples faced different clocks. Frost meant wind machines in orchards and ladders moving faster than comfort allowed. In a Yakima packing shed, supervisors doubled brake schedules and posted a second first aid cart because speed invites slips. PW crews under guard fed the line. Women's Land Army volunteers stacked and sorted. School releases filled corners where small hands could pack cartons gently. The wage sheets matched across crews. The point was not to cheapen labor. It was to guarantee it. The climax tightened where crops met rail. At Concordia, Kansas, a branch camp liaison rode the last truck to the loading spur to make sure labor did not halt because a clerk misplaced a sheet. At Algona, the town minutes later recorded the quiet hero of the day as a boilerman at the factory who kept steam up for slicers that ran past midnight. Because if slicers stopped, topped beets waited, sugar content slid and the work in the rows lost its measure. At Rupert, the Army approved Sunday. Movement to the scale with the rider that religious service be offered at dawn and repeated in camp that evening. Geneva's Sabbath. Respected while the harvest emergency was honored. Surprise crossed the fence line in 2 directions. POWs primed by rumor to expect a flick of the wrist that robbed a day's tally. Saw the opposite. Rate as posted. No deduction from the prisoner's coupon credit for tools or transport. And the Army handling its own costs on its side of the ledger. Farmers, primed to suspect sullen hands, saw crews that worked like any crews once the routine proved itself. Sleet-stiffened jackets. Gloves grew slick with sap and mud. The tally sheets, the real protagonists of the day, stayed legible under oilskin covers and arrived at the branch camp dry. When the frost finally marched across northern rows, many fields stood finished or close enough to cut losses to accounting rather than grief. Factory yards piled high. Tank cars took on syrup. County boards wrote thank yous in their minutes to the camp commandants and to school superintendents who had released classes for morning shifts. The interesting line in those minutes was not gratitude. It was rates observed. That phrase protected the program more than any speech. It told skeptical neighbors that the presence of captured men in their fields had not rewritten the wage book. In that week, policy lived or died in small, cold decisions. A guard who permitted 5 extra minutes of warmth because frostbite cost more than a schedule. A farmer who signed the posted figure even when a harvest's edge tempted him to shave. A commandant who extended canteen hours and safeguarded Sunday with double services. A man of confidence who wrote a grievance and saw it resolved in ink, because a time column had been shorted by a clerk in a hurry. Each item held a seam of trust together. The frost receded. The trucks kept their hours. The program had proved it could expand under pressure without breaking its center line. Prevailing wage, paid through the government, coupon pay credited to the prisoner, non-compulsory work leadership by NCOs, rest and worship protected, the ledger matched to the day's sweat. The next season would ask a different question. Could a system that fought a crisis become normal without relaxing its rules? And could it carry that normal through to repatriation when 1945 turned the page? Victory in Europe changed the calendar, not the crops. V-Day, May 8, 1945, arrived on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, orchards still budded, beet fields still needed thinning, cotton rows still waited for hands. German POWs in American camps woke to formation and to rumors about repatriation. County agents woke to rate sheets and to calls from canneries worried about peaches that ripen whether treaties end or not. The program's test shifted. Could an emergency structure become ordinary without relaxing the rules that had made it credible? The answer appeared first in schedules, then in signatures. Branch camps posted work rosters that ran through September. County boards renewed their prevailing wage bulletins and mailed copies to pastors, editors, and farm bureaus, the same audience that had policed fairness during the crunch of 1944. War Department circulars reiterated the Geneva spine: officers not compelled to labor, enlisted men only at non-military, non-dangerous paid tasks, rest days, religious services, complaint channels through the man of confidence, inspections when roads allowed. A new paragraph acknowledged repatriation queues but added the practical rider that detachments would continue, until relieved, to protect harvests and contracts already signed. In beet country, spring thinning returned with fewer speeches. At Algona, the county agent's pocket watch set 10-minute breaks at the top of each hour, as if timekeeping itself were a crop. At Scottsbluff, crews rotated between fields and factory yards. The slicers ran twin shifts because the rail net, freed of wartime priority trains, could finally keep up with syrup cars. The rate sheet stayed pinned at the top of clipboards, and the line as posted kept its quiet authority. In Idaho, the Rupert Branch Camp added a second coupon window on Fridays to avoid long queues. The commandant called it good order by 5 minutes spared. Canneries and packing houses standardized their POW shifts. Tally clocks ticked. Brake bells chimed. Supervisors, many of them women who had learned to line management during the war, kept the rhythm with fewer arguments over piece versus hourly because the judge advocate memoranda circulated the previous fall had settled method. Follow the county board's posted standard or don't contract at all. New hires from high school and women's land army crews worked shoulder to shoulder with guarded POW details across a marked line where safety officers repeated the same phrase every hour. Steady feed beats sprint and stall. There were disputes. At a Texas gin, a grower tried to substitute a lower piece rate citing peacetime conditions. The county agent produced the current bulletin. The camp procurement officer produced the contract. The man of confidence waited without raising his voice. The grower signed the line already printed. In a Yakima shed, a foreman cut a break short during a heat spike. A nurse from the camp dispensary, stationed by agreement for hot days, wrote the time in her book, and the commandant extended Saturday rest by 1 hour to compensate. The log held the program together when tempers and temperatures ran high. Inspections gathered momentum as roads and rail eased. Representatives of the Protecting Power and the International Committee of the Red Cross arrived with clipboards in a manner that mixed courtesy with exactness. They walked the rows, asked about work hours, checked canteen ledgers, noted that officers were not compelled and that NCOs served as work leaders by consent, not compulsion. They toured chapels and read bulletins in German that summarized rights and rules. Their reports did not flatter. They recorded blankets short here, latrines too close there, a guard too easy with words in one county, a camp choir welcomed at a church hall in another. But the line that mattered: wages at prevailing local rates paid to the Treasury. Coupon credits posted in camp books appeared again and again. That line had become the program's reputation. The social ground, newly fragile after VE Day celebrations, steadied under habit. Communities had learned where the lines lay and kept them. Work under guard, worship by posted hours, visits when authorized. No cash outside the fence. Concerts continued, POW choirs singing Stille Nacht in December, hymns in June on courthouse lawns. Church suppers left pies on trestles just outside the MP cordon. Pastors blessed the table as common ground under law. The gesture meant more in 1945 than it had in 1944 because the uniforms were no longer forced by wartime panic. They were kept by treaty and by contracts that people still honored when fear had ebbed. Repatriation finally cast a long shadow across the fields. Orders slotted men by priority: medical, maritime, early capture, skilled trades. Some POWs shipped not to Germany first but to the United Kingdom or France for additional labor under Allied agreements. Then home later. Camp commandants briefed crews bluntly: "You may work this week and leave the next. The ledger will close clean. Coupon balances will be settled." County agents asked, quietly anxious, whether crews could be held through apple and beet finish. The Army answered with charts, detachments tapered by camp, replacements drawn from posts farther afield, contracts honored to last practical day. The trucks kept their hours while names on the roll call changed. A few farewells wrote themselves into town minutes. In Concordia, a pastor noted, German choir offered thanks for fair treatment. Congregation listened standing. In Algona, the paper recorded a harvest appreciation, at which farmers shook hands with work leaders through a fence and said nothing more elaborate than good luck. The man of confidence in more than one branch camp wrote a final letter to the commandant. Wages were as posted, complaints answered, services held. It was bureaucratic language, but in it lived a kind of respect that does not require sentiment to be true. The last act of normalization was accounting. Fiscal clerks balanced farmer payments against treasury receipts. Camp books closed with coupon credits tallied and signed. Rate sheets were filed with the note observed entire season. County boards reported upward. Crops saved. Disputes minimal. Security incidents few and brief. Escapes returned hungry and cold. When trains finally pulled from sidings with boxcars turned into long rides east, the program did not collapse into nostalgia. It concluded like a harvest concludes, field by field, form by form, with thanks that sounded like relief. What remained, once the trucks were gone, was measurable. Tonnage saved. Shifts run. Rates respected. Treasury lines balanced. And something harder to weigh. A memory among men who had expected cruelty and met a posted rate that held, and among communities that had expected trouble and met a program that obeyed its own rules. The aftermath can now count what was rescued from weather and war, and what a ledger, kept under guard and under law, left behind in ledgers, letters, and the quiet way people told the story later. The first balance sheets closed before the last trains left. County boards submitted season summaries in neat columns. Acres worked. Worker days supplied, wage rate observed, disputes recorded. Beet districts counted in tons lifted and % sugar retained. Cotton counties in bales saved and gin hours. Orchard regions in carloads shipped and canneries kept at 2 shifts. The numbers did not brag. They documented losses avoided, a kind of victory that reads quieter than headlines but feeds more people. Camp commandants filed their own ledgers to Corps area headquarters. Morning reports noted detail sizes, guard ratios, transport mileage, canteen coupon credits issued, disciplinary actions, and escapes. The pattern was consistent across the map. Long stretches of routine, rare infractions, short-lived escapes brought back by weather, hunger, or a sheriff's phone call. Where a quarrel over piece rate or hours appeared, the paperwork shows a judge-advocate ruling pinned to the page, a paragraph that quotes the posted rate and the signed contract, and closes the file with a date and initials. In the agricultural columns, POW labor appears as a stabilizer, not a discount. The prevailing wage stayed posted and paid. Farmers wrote checks to the U.S. Treasury, not to individuals. From there, War Department finance officers credited camp coupon pay to prisoners' accounts by number. Fiscal officers balanced income, farmer payments against outlays, rations, quarters, transport, guards. Surpluses reduced the net cost of detention. Deficits, where they occurred, were explained by distance, small detail sizes, or heavy transport miles in thinly settled counties. Either way, the program's economics rested on a principle visible in every audit: fair rates as the non-negotiable centerline. Inspection reports turned the numbers into testimony. Representatives of the Protecting Power and the International Committee of the Red Cross arrived more regularly once roads thawed and shipping eased. They recorded wage compliance, work types, non-military, not dangerous, hours and rest days, religious services, canteen stock, and the status of complaint channels through the man of confidence. They found faults: blanket short here, latrine placement there, a guard's language noted and corrected, but they returned repeatedly to the same sentence in their notes. Wages at prevailing rates, credited. Bookkeeping in order. The sentence mattered for law. It mattered more for reputation. Local papers captured the tone. Minutes from farm bureaus and city councils mentioned program orderly, rates observed, escapes few and returned. In places like Algona and Concordia, newsletters from the main camps reported branch details with the diction of schedules. Trucks out at 0615, back at 1710. Sunday rest respected. Services held. In beat country, factory bulletins thanked boilermen and scale crews by name because keeping steam up or numbers straight had saved what frost threatened. The line that ties the notes together is procedural. The contract had become habit. POWs' records, where preserved, echo the bureaucracy with human edges. Diaries mention coupon purchases, soap, tobacco, stationery, and canteen lines on Fridays. Letters home, filtered by censors, use the same careful phrases: Arbeit geordnet, Lohn nach Tarif, Gottesdienst sonntags. The surprise most often recorded is not hospitality. It is predictability. The posted wage proved to be the paid wage. Hours matched the sheet. Complaints traveled a path that ended in a written answer. For men raised on state slogans, a ledger that balanced felt like a different kind of promise kept. Security files stayed slim where rules held. Sheriffs logged escape recaptures as routine entries. 2 prisoners returned wet and hungry. 1 surrendered at farm kitchen after 2 nights. County agents logged tool losses and breakages. The forms show government replacement, not deductions from a prisoner's credit. Pastors wrote a line or two. Vespers conducted, choir permitted on the courthouse lawn, attendance orderly. None of this sentimentalized the war. It marked a season in which law plus ledger had kept temper inside lines drawn in advance. Economically, the season's story is visible in throughput. Canneries met contracts. Packing sheds shipped on schedule. Beet factories ran slicers late because topped routes arrived in time. Rail dispatchers report carloads that did not slip into backlog. Truck dispatchers note fewer idle hours. When the War Food Administration and state boards closed their year, they credited emergency labor detachments, POW, alongside school releases and the Women's Land Army, not as replacements, but as an extra layer of certainty. The program's endgame appears in accounting entries titled Final Settlement. As repatriation orders advanced in 1945, camp finance officers reconciled coupon balances, closed farmer accounts, and stamped rate sheets with observed for the season. County boards filed a last report, harvest completed, disputes minimal, security stable, public cooperation sustained. The neutrality of the language is the point. A wartime improvisation had matured into procedure and left behind a paper trail that could be defended by any commander in any hall, where the policy might be questioned. The ledger closes, with one more column that numbers cannot capture directly, but every report implies confidence. Farmers expected trucks to come. POWs expected coupon pay to post. Guards expected schedules to hold. Inspectors expected records to match reality. Confidence is not a decoration. It is an output. In 1944-45, it harvested tons. The concluding section will turn from columns to consequences in memory and policy. What this steadiness did to attitudes on both sides of the fence, to surrender decisions in a war's last months, and to the practices the United States carried forward when the uniforms and the trucks were gone. What the ledgers measured in tons and hours, memories translated into posture. For the prisoners, the harvest years settled into a set of durable impressions. Order, wages as posted, complaints answered, Sunday observed. Letters that passed censors carried careful phrases: Arbeit geordnet, Lohn nach Tarif, Gottesdienst sonntags, that families kept because they contradicted rumor without provoking censors. Diaries noted small liberties: a bar of soap bought with coupons, a pencil for a letter, a hymn sung at dusk along a fence. Shock at being paid the local rate gave way to the steadier knowledge that the rate would hold tomorrow. In barracks talk, that predictability did two things. It reduced panic about the immediate future, and it carved a line between propaganda and procedure. Men who had expected humiliation recorded arithmetic instead. Those impressions traveled back across the Atlantic with repatriation. From late 1945 through 1946, railheads filled and camps thinned. Some men routed first to France or the United Kingdom for interim labor, then home. The harvest narrative went with them. Guarded work, fair rates, ledgers that balanced. It joined other factors, food in camps, medical care, the absence of reprisals, in shaping how former POWs described the United States to families and neighbors. The story was not sentimental. It was procedural. They kept the posted wage. In towns rebuilding under rationing and rubble, such a sentence had weight because it described something replicable, a rule obeyed. For American communities, the program left a practical and moral ledger. Practical, because crops reached markets and factories met contracts during thin years. Moral, because towns had honored a treaty in public, with rate sheets on clipboards and Sunday rest in bulletins. Minutes from councils and farm boards in places like Algona and Concordia show the stance adopted when questions rose. The prisoners were legal labor under Geneva. The wage was prevailing, the pay flowed to the treasury, and coupon credits stayed inside the fence. That language equipped pastors at church suppers, sheriffs at town halls, and county agents at field edges to answer hard questions with something more than opinion. It also circumscribed kindness, making room for holiday choirs at courthouse lawns, for pies set on trestles under guard, without allowing the lines to blur. There were returns. In the 1950s and 1960s, former POWs, now civilians with families, visited Midwestern towns and Great Plains counties where they had worked. They stood for photos at cannery doors and packing sheds, found pastors who still remembered hymn lists, and knocked on farmhouse doors to say a single, unadorned thank you. A few emigrated later, sponsored by relatives or employers who had learned their names under guard and remembered their steadiness. Those stories belonged to local papers and family albums rather than official reports, but their details rhyme. A posted rate remembered, a ledger that matched a day's sweat, a fence that kept its rules. Policy learned too. The War Department's circulars, judge-advocate opinions, and camp finance procedures hardened into a template for managing enemy labor within law. Contracted at local wage, payments through government, no cash outside, coupon economies inside, rest and worship protected, complaints in writing, inspections when routes allowed. Post-war doctrinal manuals retained that spine, useful not only for POW management but for any large program in which the United States wished to tie reputation to record. The lesson that logistics is the first language of mercy and of credibility outlived the harvests. The limits were real. Fair pay under guard did not erase telegrams, nor did it indemnify every incident. Escapes occurred. Tempers flared. A broken window and a hard word appear in more than one sheriff's log. The program asked small towns to be principled while they worried about sons far away. Its discipline prevented most harms and corrected others, but it did not pretend to be reconciliation. It was less dramatic and more durable. A fence that kept its own rules. A wage that matched the bulletin. A Sabbath respected. A complaint answered in ink. In the wider arc of the war's last year, such steadiness mattered. Surrender in groups came easier where rumors of fair treatment had outrun leaflets. Inspections that read, "Wages at prevailing rates credited," gave U.S. commanders something to show protecting powers and allies when conduct was contested elsewhere. And the harvest tonnage, prosaic but essential, fed civilians and soldiers without requiring new ration cuts. The enemy's astonishment gave way to a cooler acknowledgement. The Americans ran their camp economy by the book. When the last truck stopped at the branch gates and the last rate sheets were stamped observed for the season, the program ended as it had run, quietly on time. What remained lived in two places, in ledgers precise enough to face auditors and historians, and in habit, the reflex to post the rate, to read it aloud, to sign the sheet, to credit the coupon, to hold the Sabbath, to keep the complaint channel open. That habit is how policy survives a change of weather and a change of uniforms. The film has one last task, to set this steadiness in a wider light, what it says about law, logistics, and character in a democracy at war. and how a farmer's signature at dusk can be an instrument of strategy as surely as a convoy at dawn. The harvest years teach a quiet theorem. Character, under strain, is proved by procedure. In a nation at war, it would have been easy to treat wage sheets as ornaments and fences as excuses. Instead, the United States pinned a posted rate to a clipboard, read it aloud at dusk, and signed the line in view of men who had worn the enemy's uniform that spring. The act was not sentimental. It was administrative, and that is why it held. Law moved through ledgers, through county bulletins, through judge-advocate paragraphs, through the measured steps of an MP keeping count while a farmer kept time, and a man of confidence kept the complaints in order. Where the routine was respected, astonishment lost its voice and predictability took its place. Fair pay under guard did more than save crops. It converted Geneva from principle into practice in towns that measured morality against tonnage and time. The machinery of payment, farmer to treasury, treasury to camp ledger, ledger to coupon credit, did not advertise virtue. It produced trust that could be audited. Inspectors wrote the sentence that mattered, wages at prevailing rates, credited, and that sentence traveled farther than any poster, because it described a habit others could verify. On the ground, the decency was plainest in the smallest choices, a rate honored when frost tempted shortcuts, a Sabbath kept when trains ran late, a grievance answered in ink instead of in temper. These were not grand reconciliations. They were the work of a democracy keeping its word at scale, proof that logistics is a language of mercy when law insists and local hands obey the clock. When prisoners went home, they carried a simple line. They paid what they posted. When towns told their children what the trucks were and why the guards stood easy at the fence on Sundays, they could point to a ledger and say the same. Policy became memory because paper matched practice. So the closing image belongs to a field at dusk. Tools counted back. The county agent reads a number that everyone has learned by heart. The farmer signs. The army countersigns. Coupons are credited at a canteen window where soap and paper sit in neat rows. A truck gate closes on time. The harvest is safe, and the rule that made it possible remains pinned to a board where tomorrow's light will find it.